Right, so we're going to go ahead and get started here. First and foremost, my name is Mark Donnell, president and partner here at OnTech Systems. I appreciate all of you having some flexibility in your schedules and joining us for a webinar for this Learn on Lunch series. Thought about ordering Jimmy John's for everybody and sending it all out to your houses, but that probably wasn't going to be too feasible. So I think we're all adapting to this stay-at-home order, and we'll continue to have these webinars like we normally would for those of you that have joined us last year for these monthly Learn on Lunches that we do. But today's topic is why your next server should be in the cloud. I've got two people joining me today, and I'm sure they'll introduce themselves here in a little bit. First and foremost is our cloud services and managed services manager, Jared Olson. He's a familiar face for some of you that have been to our presentations before. Secondly, we've got another cloud service technician, Dan Deneen. Dan has been with us quite a while and really is starting to head up a lot of the Azure work that we do. So Dan will be contributing to this presentation as well. The important thing to know is there's a lot of cloud partners out there. OnTech is actually partners with Microsoft and with Google. We are going to look into AWS as well over the next few months and coming years, but we really see the cloud, the security it offers, the mobility it offers is really being a strong point of our business. Looking back over the last 3 or 4 years, cloud is probably the fastest growing part of what we do, and a lot of it is the small to medium-sized businesses that we work with. It really gives those customers a lot of functionality and flexibility, which the guys are going to review here in a few minutes, but it is very fast and growing. Our account managers get a lot of questions about it. So today during this call, the first couple minutes we're going to leave open so that people, if there's something in particular, a goal you'd like to come away with from this meeting, we'd like to hear about it. You can speak up. There's also a chat button on the bottom of your screen. You could type a question there. And there's also a question button where you can show the Q&A and send some questions over that way. Then during the presentation, we're going to mute all the attendees, and then we'll open it back up at the end of the presentation for some questions and answers. At the end of this, I'll be sending out a download of the webinar itself. So if there's other people within your teams or within your company you'd like to review some specific slides with, or features, you'll have access to that as well. So moving on to the next slide, I do want to kind of focus on what we're doing today, which is Azure. However, coming up, there are some other cloud products that are available out there, whether it's Microsoft SharePoint, there's Microsoft Teams, which a lot of people are using remotely. There's a lot of things you can do within Azure, more extensive than just having a traditional server up there. So we do have quite a few events coming up, and you guys can kind of see on here if you'd like to jump into Eventbrite and register for them. Usually we do a lunch here at the office, and we're hoping to get back to that throughout the summer if things are able to calm down, which I'm sure a lot of us hope that it will. So otherwise, jumping into the agenda today, what we're going to touch on is just some customer success stories, some direct stories of some of our clients. We won't be mentioning any names, but I think it's important to understand how other businesses are using this. We've got people on this webinar that are in government, some in industries where you're keeping a lot of personally identifiable information, a lot of manufacturing and distribution customers as well. So we're seeing a lot of cloud success across various verticals. We're going to jump into what is the cloud. I know there's some people that have questions about what exactly the cloud is, why companies are moving, cloud requirements and things you should do to prepare yourself for the cloud. A big topic is always security and compliance with the cloud. And then there's some small additional offerings and some add-ons that some companies like to utilize. So at this time, I did want to kind of open it up to all the attendees. I don't see any questions over on the side, but if anybody is interested in speaking up, kind of pause for 10 or 15 seconds. And if anybody's willing to talk about anything they're particularly, All right, Jared, I will pass it off to you. Or Dan, actually.
Thank you, Mark. We had a little brief audio blip there towards the end, right after you were about to talk about open discussion. So I don't know if you want to rehash that quickly in case anybody else could not hear.
Yeah, if anybody would like to maybe ask any questions or goals that they'd like to get from this presentation, we can pay special attention to some of the slides that we're going to go over. If you're willing to speak up, if not, you can throw your questions over on the Q&A or the chat box on the side, and we can address those at the end of the call. So I did want to give it 10 or 15 seconds here and see if anybody wants to speak up. If not, I will pass this on to Dan and Jared to take over.
Thank you, Mark. Yeah, like Mark said, if there's any questions throughout the event, please click on the icon in the upper right corner that looks like a question mark with a little dialog box beneath it. You can also use the meeting chat log if you'd like to chat through that way. If we happen to not be able to receive any of your audio or any of your questions through the system, please feel free to email those questions over to Mark or myself or Dan after the call. So thanks again, Mark. My name is Jared Olson. For those of you who don't know, I've been at OnTech for about 8 years now. I've been doing cloud and managed services for about six or so years here at OnTech. Dan's been a vital part of my team in terms of cloud services and managed services over the years. So I'll let him kind of talk about himself for a second, and then he's going to take over for the presentation for a little bit.
Thanks, Jared. My name is Dan Deneen. Been with OnTech for going on almost 8 years now. Like Jared said, we've been working together on a lot of the Azure side for customers, whether that's planning and deploying and future development in Azure. So we've had a lot of customer success stories when it comes to Azure. Some of the examples we'll give, as you see in the slide, is a certain customer had a VMware server, and we were in discussions of planning on moving to Azure in the future, but it wasn't at that present time. It was going to be, quarter 3, quarter 4 of last year, and their VMware server, which was out of warranty, had died. It was an older server going on 6 years, and completely died. And so when we ran the cost comparison to replace the host itself and restore the server or go to Azure, it was pretty clear that what they wanted to do with having to go to Azure in the coming, later half of the year. So we were able to spin up their Azure server and get all their data recovered in 24 hours, and then get all the users connected within that second day. So their total downtime was 2 days, where if we were going to do something on-prem, we'd have to overnight hardware, build hardware, and then restore everything that way. So the recovery time in that scenario was a huge benefit to them going forward. The next item on the list, the remote desktop capabilities, that is so in terms of Azure, you have your domain controller, and you have what they now call an RDS server, remote desktop services server. Used to be called terminal server, if any of you are familiar with that. And that gives us the ability to set up session-based remote desktop environments for users to log into. There's a lot of scalability and simple. It's a very simplified process, whereas you can publish a user's application to a website that they can log into and then gain access to a portal to get to that remote desktop. So the cost is less. It's perfect for someone if they don't want a capital expense of having an on-prem remote desktop server, and just run on an operating expense of a monthly recurring. The third item, malware infection recovery. We had another customer that introduced a crypto locker of sort into their environment, which then replicated to their Azure servers. So they had 2 servers in Azure, a domain controller and a RDS server. and this replicated very, very fast. We caught it within 2 hours of its replication. We were able to stop it, but the replication had done a lot of damage to their servers already. So Microsoft Azure uses a recovery services vault, it's called, with Azure Backup. And so we were able to take those 2 servers, take the backup from the night before, and restore both servers in full working order within 30 minutes. It's a huge testament to Azure. And the process from a technical standpoint is pretty straightforward, but to offer a customer that kind of recovery time was great. Now every site's different. Every site has a certain amount of data or more applications. This site, wasn't super involved, but they were running a accounting application. They did have a lot of data and their domain controller as well. So to be able to restore those customers in 30 minutes was a huge plus, and they were beyond happy as well. The next point we have is for the hosting the customer facing membership application. So a lot of vendors, I can give some. There'll be Sage, there will be JobBoss, even QuickBooks hosted solutions in their cloud. So a lot of software vendors offer to host solutions for your software, and the cost on those a lot of times is pretty high, in my opinion, for running that, as opposed to if you were bringing that software on site. So the problem with bringing the software on site is then you have, again, the hardware that you have to maintain, the hardware that you have to back up, the hardware that you have to license. So another customer, as a success story, they were hosting a application called JobBoss, and they were hosting it in another company's hosted environment that does that hosting. And we were able to cut their cost significantly. I want to say it was about 40% to move it to their own Azure environment, and the process again went smooth. Now they were already in Azure, so in terms of the time to get up a scenario like that, once the servers are built, it took under 2 hours to get them migrated and up and running. And some of the feedback that we've gotten is really, really good from this customer. JobBoss is it's a SQL backed program, so it's very memory intensive, and the feedback I got within the first hour was that the application performed 10 times better, 10 times faster than their current solution, or than their previous solution, and they were really, really happy with that. So that's pretty much what I had for my success stories documented. I'll turn it back over to Jared. I know he had a couple that he wanted to talk about.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. I think you're seeing a common theme there. The example I wanted to talk about was where our customer was evaluating between hardware and on-premise or cloud services. And as a technical team, we all thought that the customer wanted to go with on-premise due to just typical purchasing behaviors that they've exhibited in the past. The fact that their cloud environment might be significantly more expensive over a 5 to 7 year period of time. But it was our due diligence to ensure that we're providing both options. Do you want this capital expenditure, buy the hardware up front, buy the software up front, and then in 5, 6 years replace that hardware, go through the process again? Or would you prefer to go with a cloud service that can offer a little bit more flexibility, might be a little more expensive in terms of month-to-month costs, but you don't have to come up with that capital up front? And much to our surprise, they decided to go with the cloud option. So again, it's important for, I think, for a business to evaluate that too. Just you may think the cloud is more expensive overall, but if you think about the hardware that you have to maintain on premise, the networking equipment that you have to maintain on premise, the lack of flexibility that it might give your business in a case where you may need to move to a new location or whatever that might be, some of those other factors other than the monetary factors are often more important for businesses. So we'll go ahead and move over to the next slide here. And I'm going to turn it back over to Dan for a little bit.
So this, the next slide with what is the cloud? This is kind of a question we get, a lot, and I'm sure everyone has heard the term the cloud. It can mean, many different things. There's a lot of big names out there that utilize the cloud, whether you have an iPhone and you use iCloud to back up your data, or email solutions would be hosted, in the cloud, whether it's Microsoft Exchange or Gmail, of some examples. So the cloud is, in simplest terms, is pretty much everywhere. It's accessing your data, it's accessing your virtual machines, your applications. It can be websites even, and you utilize your internet connection to access those. There's three main types of cloud computing that we see, and I'll go over those three. So they kind of all sound the same. So there's what's called SaaS, and that is software as a service. And so software as a service in the cloud, it's simply you access your product through your web browser, and you don't have to be connected to any other installation. You don't have to be connected to a VM. It's pretty much your software that's hosted somewhere in the cloud, whether that would be through Azure, whether that's through AWS, whether that's through other, even QuickBooks with their cloud solution. So that's the first kind. The second would be PaaS, and that's platform as a service. So this is platform as a service, kind of encompasses many different items that work together to solve your business needs. So that can be integrating SQL and, let's say, an application that uses that SQL, and you can build and you can test and you can deploy different things in that type of a platform. The last environment is infrastructure as a service, and this is kind of the most common one that we utilize when we talk about when we recover customers to the cloud, or we migrate customers to the cloud. So infrastructure as a service kind of encompasses everything. So you have your virtual machines, you have your networking up there, you have your security. This allows companies to build their own solutions and form the cloud solution to what their needs are. So I know we have a short video that kind of talks about what the cloud is and kind of shows some of the data centers. So when we refer to the cloud, your data is residing in data centers all over the world. So it's a pretty neat little video. I'll let Jared send it back over to him.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. So I'm gonna go ahead and share my audio here. And I'm going to switch my screen that I'm presenting, so bear with me a second.
The Azure Cloud Platform is growing every day, adding new features and reaching new users. With a global data center presence that spans 54 regions, 70,000 miles of fiber, multiple subsea cable systems, and over 130 edge sites, Microsoft is constantly extending the reach of the cloud, bringing technology as close to our customers as possible. By designing and implementing faster, more energy-efficient hardware, our teams have increased data center performance and efficiency. We are driving toward increased environmental sustainability, using renewable energy sources and power-producing projects on 3 continents, totaling 1.2 gigawatts. Every year, Microsoft invests over $1 billion in cybersecurity to defend against evolving threats. From experimenting with advanced fuel cells to launching underwater data centers, we are constantly investing in research to make data center infrastructure more efficient and reduce environmental impact. And we are collaborating with open source partners to develop next-generation hyperscale cloud hardware. As the Azure Cloud Platform grows, we gain the opportunity to make a positive impact in our communities by implementing affordable access to high-speed internet, providing IT training and job readiness programs, and by helping our community where it's needed most. Your vision, your cloud. Azure, cloud for all.
So hopefully that displays a little bit about the scale in which we're dealing with the cloud. I'm going to go ahead and flip back to the presentation here. So as I was saying, the sheer cloud scale that Microsoft's able to deliver within their data centers is tremendous. We've had some servers where if you do a speed test within your Azure environment, you're getting 700 to 800 megabits per second in some cases even more. So the endless possibilities of what you might want to be doing in the cloud is pretty much as high as you need to see in terms of a ceiling. For example, the Olympics had been broadcasted through Microsoft Azure for, I think I want to say, for the past 2 Olympics. All the live streaming and all the online recordings have all been done through Azure environment. So to bring that scale to a global level is pretty tremendous. Real Madrid, the soccer team that some people might know across the world, the most popular soccer team in the world, runs all of their social media, all their video content and publishing through Microsoft Azure. So when you think about the cloud, Netflix, Gmail, all these Office 365, all these systems are backed by tremendously powerful enterprise hardware running in somebody else's data center. So we're going to go ahead and move on to some reasons why you might want to think about moving to the cloud. And I'll go ahead and turn this back to Dan for a little bit.
So there's many reasons to move to the cloud. We're just going to hit on some of them. The list is some of the reasons we see the most why people are questioning, okay, is it time to go to the cloud? So the top one would be warranty expiring on your hardware. So, we know the average life of hardware is anywhere from 4 to 6 years, depending on how heavily it's used. So a lot of times when we work with our customers and we near that timeline, that's when we start saying, okay, it's time to think about which direction do you want to go? Do you want to move to on-prem, or do you stay on-prem, or do you want to move to the cloud? So that's kind of a big one that we see, as well as urgent capacity needs. So that's the next set. So that would be if you are rapidly growing and outgrowing what your hardware can handle. Do you want to buy another server to grow with, or is it time to just cut that off and move to a very scalable solution in Microsoft Azure? So the next, I'm sure everyone's familiar with Windows 7 coming end of life. With that was also Server 2008. So we see that a lot too with people on older servers. It's okay, do we want to spend the time to upgrade our server to a supported operating system, or is it time to, again, move to the cloud? Out of support applications is the next list, and that will be, again, for if, let's say you're using Sage 100 and there's a big Sage upgrade, you're on Sage 2017 and they're pushing you to move to 2019, and that'll be spinning up a new a new server to accommodate that need. So we see sometimes where people will have that type of an application upgrade needed, and they've decided then to move to a cloud solution. Another great thing with Azure is new application deployments or innovation, which is developing and testing. So we'll have customers that will run in Azure and have a live server that's running, but they also have a server that they do all their developing and testing on. And so they can spin up the dev test server, do all their changes and test it while their other servers, running before they make those changes and kind of test things and make sure everything's working right. The next item would be compliance. If you have certain compliance requirements, Microsoft spends a ton of money on their security. If anyone needs to see any information on all their compliant requirements and what they follow, Jared and I do have access to that. Just let us know and we can send out that information, because there is a ton. And lastly, reducing capital expenses. So, servers are expensive, hardware is expensive, and licensing is expensive. So rather than having that big upfront cost, it's always, we've seen it a lot. People like to have that recurring monthly cost that's spread out over the course of, 1 year, 2 year, 3 years. So some of the other reasons that I just have noted on here are, again, like I just talked about, was reduced cost, the monthly spend over large upfront costs. Flexibility is another really big one. Being able to work from anywhere, that you have an internet connection, especially with what's going on right now. It's been people that have been utilizing Azure have been utilizing that flexibility that they have. Next would be scalability. So if your company is growing and you're on one server and you grow and you need to add 25 employees or you need to add 2 or 3 servers, the scalability in Azure is there, and we can scale up and down services as you need. Another big thing that we talked about with some of our success stories was the integrated backup and disaster recovery. So you don't have to spend high expenses for having an on-prem solution, whether that's Datto, whether that's some other solution that's you're bringing on site. It gets all your data off-site and it's redundant in Microsoft's data centers. You also don't have to worry about if your building has a fire, right? So if you have a natural disaster in your building, and you're in the cloud, you're replacing a firewall and some switches and wiring and stuff, right? So everything, all your important data, all your servers are offsite. There's a lot of different options available with the cloud as to why you'd want to move, like we talked about with their different offerings in their, software as a service, infrastructure as a service. So, and I would say the last thing is probably collaborations. So using cloud as we see is like we're doing right now. Teams is a Microsoft solution, and we're able to do these meetings. We can utilize OneDrive and share data. We can utilize hosted Exchange and have our email offsite. We can utilize SharePoint. So there's a lot of different offerings besides just Azure. Pretty much all I had for reasons to move, unless Jared has anything to add.
Yeah, I think that's a good transition, Dan, into another slide here that indicates some other reasons why you may want to consider moving to the cloud. The division of responsibilities between you being the customer or the provider hosting the hardware and the software. So if you look at this breakdown, when you're on premises on the far left, you're responsible for everything: data classification, accountability, endpoint protection, controls, infrastructure, security, all of that. As you start to move into those different platforms that Dan was talking about, you lessen the load on your on-premise IT department, your on-premise employees to maintain the hardware, maintain the controls, maintain the physical security. A lot of those things can be shifted off onto your cloud provider. And lastly, that software as a service, you can see, is kind of a measurement of best of all worlds. Excuse me, I just accidentally progressed the slide. So Office 365 is considered software as a service. There's no need to maintain the Exchange hardware for email. There's no need to maintain the Exchange email software. There's no need to purchase licenses for it and install it, maintain it as you add more employees. Configuring your server is not something you need to do. It's just a service that you subscribe to that's available with an SLA at scale anywhere, anytime throughout the world. So that's an example of a software as a service. I'm going to get into some other benefits or why you might want to consider a movement to the cloud, or at least planning for it. Operational benefits. You're able to expedite your operational capacity while basically reducing your overhead costs. So business is evolving. Like Dan mentioned, we're living in a world where we're always on, we're always working from anywhere. We need to get something at 11 p.m. at night, and if the VPN's not working or the server's down or the internet's off at the office, I can't really do my job or function effectively. So operationally, there's a lot of reliability benefits and resiliency benefits, because again, you're getting enterprise hardware at nominal cost. If you wanted to maintain the type of hardware that Microsoft or AWS or Google has in their data center, you're talking exorbitant amount of money to obtain that. Dan touched on it earlier: improved data backup, disaster recovery, a lot of reasons operationally to consider the cloud. Financially, I guess I would say it's not always going to be cheaper financially to go to the cloud, but you can save on your hardware leasing or purchasing costs. You can avoid some of the licensing renewal costs, and overall just maybe enable a different revenue streams by not having that upfront large capital expenditure. And some companies are experiencing a return on investment in massive amounts. You can see there's a study there that's been done on the right-hand side of the total economic impact of infrastructure as a service, and what is that taking your hardware, your virtual machines, moving them to Azure, like Dan talked about. So we're going to go on to the next part. Again, we talked about this a little bit further, but I'm gonna let Dan pick back up on the disaster recovery and data backup. Talk about this slide.
So yeah, so Azure has many different backup and recovery options. I'm going to hit on a couple because it doesn't just mean that we have to utilize or have our whole system up in Microsoft Azure to utilize their backup and disaster recovery services. So from my interactions with Azure Backup and some of the success stories like I gave earlier with that company that had to be both servers restored, the process was, in terms of how I work, and it was pretty simple. It's their site is, sorry, the slides were flipping. Their backup storage is secure, and a lot of times they're pretty cost-effective solutions to store your data and recover it if you need to from the cloud. So a couple of the options that we can utilize Azure Backup for are, we'll say, is on-prem. So you can still stay on-prem and utilize Azure Backup, and Azure Backup can back up files. It can back up your folders on your server. It can take system state backups and utilize what they call their Azure Recovery Services Agent. So that means that we can, just much like you would use a data or storage graph to a NAS, we can use Azure Backup and back up your data to the cloud and store it offsite that way. That also allows you to back up entire Hyper-V or VMware workloads as well using Azure Backup Server. Another scenario for the backup and disaster recovery would be having your virtual machines in Azure and utilizing their recovery services vault for that. So that would back up entire Azure virtual machines to your cloud storage account and allow you to restore with their recovery services vault. So when we move servers to Azure and we configure your backup, we also configure a recovery services vault, and that is essentially where all your backups are stored. That allows us to do, like I said, full servers, but it also allows us to take certain points in time and mount your data drives, and we can do single file recovery or folder recoveries if something gets accidentally deleted. Another portion of Azure would be SQL servers. So Azure can do a lot of things with SQL. They have SQL as a service, so you don't actually have a virtual machine. You have a service that runs SQL, or you can have a virtual machine where you install your standard SQL and have your databases there. So Azure also can back up SQL servers and make those recovery processes much simpler. So I would say that some other benefits of the Azure Backup would be offloading your on-prem backup needs. So you get rid of that hardware for your local backup. You get rid of the NAS. You utilize bandwidth. I mean, that's really the only thing you're going to be utilizing besides cloud storage would be your bandwidth. So it's a simple solution for backing up your on-premise resources to the cloud. They offer short-term and long-term storage needs for that backup. And it can back up and restore pretty complex environments that you'd have on-prem. So they also provide independent and isolated backups. So this allows you to back up different things and guard against accidental deletion or destruction of data, whether it's on-prem or on your cloud VM. So again, they're stored. Your backups are stored in the recovery services vault, and there's redundancy built into those vaults in case a region's server were to go down or something were to happen that way. So The configuration and the scalability are pretty simple. Backups happen pretty seamlessly. We do, when customers do go to Azure, we do monitor those closely and make sure that everything does get backed up. One of the features I really like is that I can go to a server in Azure and actually check the screenshot every day if I want, and it'll show me that the server is up and running. I think that's a feature that's really, really nice. In a couple clicks, I can verify someone's backup has been successful. So one thing with backups that Azure doesn't do is they don't limit the amount of data transfer that you have inbound and outbound as well. So they don't charge for that data. So when you pay for the backup service, that data transfer is included. So that's kind of a nice feature. Again, they provide solutions for securing your data in transit and at rest. So when your backup's running, or if you're replicating backup images from your local environment to Azure, they have many different safeguards in place to secure that data while it's in transit, as well as while it's at rest in their data centers. There are multiple different storage options when it comes to Azure Backup. The two main types of replication to keep the storage of the data highly available are what they call LRS, locally redundant storage, and GRS, which is geo-redundant storage. Local redundant storage replicates your data 3 times. So it essentially creates 3 copies of your data, and in a storage in a data center. So they'll take your backup and they'll replicate that 3 times to 3 different servers in that data center. So they all exist within the same region for quicker restores or quicker access if need to. But let's say a data center that they have to do maintenance on, or a data center goes down, your backups are safeguarded, 2 other times because they're in 2 other data centers in that region. And lastly, the geo-redundant. So this is replicates your data to multiple different regions. So these regions can be hundreds or thousands of miles away if they're overseas. Geo-redundant storage is much more expensive, but it provides a much higher level of durability for your data, even if you had a regional outage. That kicks us off to our next slide, which is cloud requirements. There are some requirements when you're thinking of going to the cloud that you just always have to kind of have in the back of your mind. I would say the biggest one is fast and reliable internet. Not all sites would require fiber, but there are benefits you get with fiber, with guaranteed uptime and your SLAs and stuff when it comes with fiber. But smaller companies that don't have as many employees, they can utilize a coaxial connection to connect to Azure. Just have to be made aware that coax is a shared connection, right? So you will see fluctuations in speed. You'll see fluctuations in outages when you rely on a coax connection. We're not saying everyone has to go to fiber, but fiber will give you a much more robust connection to Azure. We see a lot of, I would say probably 75% of our customers are utilizing fiber when they access their Azure servers. If you have a really an environment with a lot of different, let's just say you have a domain controller and a RDS server and a SQL server, you would definitely want to use fiber because you're going to be running a lot of data with a lot of connections going back to those servers. The next big thing would be compatible application and vendor support. So we see a lot of vendors kind of push as soon as they hear the word Azure, they kind of push back a little bit. From my experience, it's more just because they don't have the experience. They hear that and they think, oh gosh, I'm not used to that. I don't know what that is. Our Azure servers function the same as our on-prem servers. They're in what they call a virtual network, just like your local network on site. It just happens to be virtual. So we work really closely with a lot of vendors. We ask the questions, and we have no problem spinning up servers. We have a customer right now where we spun up an RDS and a SQL server for their vendor to do testing. So we work with vendors closely to make sure that when we go to Azure, they will be able to support you and everything will function like it does or better than when it was on-prem. And lastly is a compatible firewall. So there are certain firewalls that don't work well with the VPNs and the connections to Azure. I would think probably the best, and Jared can attest to this, that I see out there right now is SonicWall in terms of working with Azure. So we always take a look at that too. And especially if your firewall's aging, it would be, and you're thinking of going to Azure, it's a good time to look at that as well.
Yeah, Dan, that's a very good point. The kind of the top ones firewall supported wise are going to be Fortinet, SonicWall, Sophos, Cisco. So if you're a Cisco shop, pretty much most of the common firewalls are going to be supported and compatible. And like Dan said, we have a lot of experience with the SonicWall specifically, and they work very well when it comes to giving you a secure connection to the cloud. So I wanted to take a moment. We did have a question that came through the chat here, so I'm going to open that up quick. Remember, if you do have questions, you can throw them in the Q&A section on the upper right corner of the meeting. You should see a little question mark with a call out box hidden behind it. And this is from one of our current customers. Why is VPN hardware like SonicWall necessary when utilizing 100% cloud-based file management, email service, software, etc.? And that's a great question. So with any type of security conversation, the more layers that you have in your network that cover security, the more secure you're going to be. A VPN hardware device like a SonicWall is necessary for a few things. One, your office, typically, a lot of companies go in this, what they call hybrid scenario, where some of their stuff lives on site, some of it lives in the cloud. They may not be able to jump straight to the cloud and be 100% cloud-based right away. So one of the benefits of having a firewall is you're still protecting yourself from outside threats. Bad actors, hackers, people like that, or they're maybe trying to forcefully enter into your network and compromise local computers, file systems, applications that you have on premise. So there's proactive security services that run on a firewall, such as a SonicWall, that protect your business from outside threats. Additionally, what it's going to do is it's going to secure your connection from your office or wherever your user base is to the cloud infrastructure. And what I mean by that is if I'm at my house and I'm connecting to Azure servers, I want to make sure that that connection is secure. That's where the VPN comes in place. It essentially encrypts the traffic between the endpoint or the end user at home and the ultimate destination of where your intellectual property lives in the cloud. So that also applies to if you have some people on premises working on physical computers and your firewall is making a VPN connection to Azure to access file shares, remote desktop services like Dan talked about. Again, that security wrapper is built around that system. It encrypts the traffic, protects your intellectual property, protects your data from outside attacks. So the great question there, Adam, on that would cover all the systems that you're talking about, the file management, the email service, the software that you access, et cetera, with one solution rather than having to have a security solution for each one of those different types of services. So that's the primary benefit.
One thing to point out too, Jared, is Azure also offers a point-to-site VPN built into their service. So when you have your remote employees, like for instance, myself, if I'm working from home and we have an Azure server, we can configure a point-to-site VPN, which actually gets installed on your employee's individual computer or laptop, so that you enable that and turn that on. It gives you a protected way to access your Azure servers rather than having to have a SonicWall in your house or some other solution for those remote employees.
Great point, Dan. All right, so we have about 15 minutes left here. We're going to be entering into the security and compliance area. So that was a good transition from the question that was asked about the security into how secure is the cloud. In a lot of ways, organizations are able to increase their security by using a lot of different mechanisms and what natively exists in the cloud. So physical security is top of mind for me. any Microsoft data center has an extensive amount of protection to reduce risks of unauthorized physical access to the data center. So 24/7 guard monitoring on the outside of the building with security gates that require biometric handprints and authentication just to get physically into the data center. And then you've got various security and design operations that happen within that data center to ensure that regarding the overall process, that everybody is following this rigorous set of security controls that govern the operations, as well as some incident response strategies that they implement. So there's different portions of Microsoft that maintain that business resilience or that cloud service resiliency to attack by decreasing the amount of time needed to prevent, detect, and respond to real-time potential internet-based threats. So as an organization, you're able to improve and increase your security in the cloud just from the outset. It also gives you additional infrastructure protection, network protection, and data protection. So for example, Azure provides the infrastructure to securely connect your virtual machines to one another and to connect on-premise data centers with Azure. So like I mentioned earlier, a lot of companies have a mixture of on-prem equipment and cloud-based equipment for various reasons. And one of those is to essentially test out the proof of concept. Does this application work in the cloud? Is it going to work? And if it doesn't, you're only spending a month's worth of time and 1 month's worth of cost to run that, rather than bringing in a bunch of hardware, trying to set it up securely, testing the applications, and then determining that, oh, this application's not going to work, and we just spent a lot of money on it. So I'm going to go to the next slide here. As you can see from this defense in depth chart, there's a lot of security around the different areas of a network that need to be secure. So identity and access management, who are you? Who do you have? What privileged access do you have within the network? Are we making sure that you're connecting, and that when you do connect, that it's actually you? Multi-factor authentication is one of those mechanisms that is a massive security improvement when using anything in the cloud, email especially. And you get into the application and data security, the encryption that Dan talked about while traffic is being transmitted from your office or from your employee's house to the cloud. It's encrypted in transit, and then once it gets there, it's encrypted within the data center. So if somebody were to steal hardware from Microsoft, they would have to decrypt all the data before they could even gain access to your data. That is a massive security improvement. Threat protection is another big area. They leverage artificial intelligence-based detection and response. So they're using security threats and trends that are happening live right now that they're able to respond to. With the $1 billion that they invest annually in cybersecurity, they're able to employ 3,500 dedicated cybersecurity professionals to help them maintain security at a global level. Microsoft's largest customer is the U.S. government, and one of the goals and transitions that they have is to make their infrastructure more secure, upgrade their systems a lot more than they have in the past. And if Microsoft's able to maintain that level of compliance in the cloud that would work for any government agency, then most of our customers are going to fit into that as well. So that's a transition into the compliance and management benefits. If an organization has their ability to improve the effectiveness of managing their regulatory challenges, if you are a regulatory compliant company, that is huge. If you're able to certify that your equipment follows HIPAA guidelines and follows PCI guidelines and show that you're doing all of that information, all of that control mechanism to be compliant, you're in a great spot. I don't know if anybody knows much about HIPAA, but if you're not adhering to some of the HIPAA standards and HIPAA requirements, you can have a fine that hits your organization upwards of starting at sometimes as low as $25,000 up to $500,000, depending on the level of severity. And if you look at effects that cities and villages and municipalities have had in the past with infections that have caused personal identifiable information to be stolen by bad actors, you'll see that there's a lot of protection that can be obtained by going to the cloud. And I think too, being able to reduce the incidence of unplanned downtime and minimize the use of having to make calls to support teams to figure out why your server's not running or why can't I access my map drives. Let's face it, there's storms that occur all the time that knock power lines out, that shut down power to buildings, that cause internet connection issues. And if you're hosting all that stuff within your building and you have an outage, you can't guarantee that you're going to be able to make that data accessible and those systems accessible to your employees and to your vendors or whoever you might serve. So there's some distinct advantages to having your infrastructure in the cloud from a management and compliance standpoint. And I'm going to hustle through these last couple slides so we can get to some questions. Like Dan and Mark had mentioned earlier, we're only primarily talking about server infrastructure and moving that to the cloud today, but there's a lot of other cloud offerings. We've got some upcoming events to talk about some of those solutions, SharePoint Online being one of them, where essentially if your organization's ready, you can go serverless. If you don't have a massive amount of applications to maintain and you just need access to files from anywhere and be able to share them with your teams and collaborate on files simultaneously together, whether you're in the office physically together or you're remotely connected through your homes, offices, or satellite offices, SharePoint Online is a really great solution. Like Dan mentioned, Microsoft Teams, we're utilizing that for planning our live events and recording our live events, and we chat as an organization. We do video calls, audio calls, public conferences, private conferences. We even do phone systems that are fully running in the cloud. No on-premise hardware required. Video streaming, Microsoft has a service called Stream, which we actually utilized internally for some training videos that will record certain steps or processes that we have and share them out with our team. There's workflow automation tools that exist out there. There's survey forms. G Suite's an example of another cloud service. So there's a lot out there that exist. And before we get into the questions and answers, I wanted to share one recent testimonial that we got regarding a customer that we took to cloud. And I want to highlight a few statements that this person put into their testimonial. So much like a lot of people prior to engaging OnTech, they were using an on-site server. It was reaching its capacity and lifespan. So right there, you've got your reason as to why they were even looking at the cloud. They did not want to buy upfront. They wanted to go to more of a month-to-month predictable model. And they also, one of their biggest concerns was protecting their intellectual property. They wanted to invest in a system that wouldn't outgrow, that the conversion was seamless. And these are their words. The business went on as usual. Over one day, we basically flipped the switch. Then they were running in the cloud. And for them, it improved their internal communication and access to their document management systems, where before it was a very big challenge for them to configure computers to access the system, and they were very concerned about the security, and their physical server was reaching capacity. So enabling the ability to use remote desktop services in the cloud with a SQL backend database and open that up to employees no matter where they were in the world was great for them. And I like this last part here. It's hard to put a value on peace of mind and confidence. So knowing that the system's secure and reliable was worth every penny to this person. And we're about 5 minutes up towards the end of the event here, so we're going to open it up a little bit more for Q&A. If we're unable to hear you with the audio, which we may not be able to hear you, just put it into the Q&A section in the chat, and we will address them as we go. Any other closing thoughts or comments, Mark? Feel free to take over and talk about that.
I think I'm good on my end. just anybody that has some questions after this, I'll make sure to get out Jared and Dan's email for any specific questions you may have that you can ask them directly. If you have an OnTech account manager, feel free to reach out to them too. But otherwise, I appreciate everyone joining today. Hopefully you were able to find some value in this, and we'll be getting a recording out to everyone after the call. All right, it doesn't sound like there's, or I don't see any questions up there. So again, we appreciate all of you joining us today, and we will get you guys a recording of this. And any questions you have, feel free to send them over directly. And like I mentioned, I'll have those email addresses for the two presenters today in that email link that I send out. So thank you again, everyone, for your time. And we look forward to maybe presenting to you guys on another topic later this year.